The Silent Room. The old mansion on Hollow Creek Road had stood abandoned for decades, or so people thought. When Daniel Whitaker, a real estate agent desperate for a sale, was assigned to inspect the property, he barely glanced at the history. It was just another old house, another commission check waiting to be claimed. The client, a mysterious out-of-town buyer, had wired a hefty deposit and insisted the inspection be done at night. Daniel wasn't superstitious, but he wasn't a fool either. The place had a reputation. Strange sounds, lights flickering inside despite no electricity, and a legend about the previous owner who simply vanished. But money talked, and Daniel needed it badly. As he approached the towering iron gates, a cold wind cut through his jacket. The hinges groaned as he pushed open the gate, stepping onto the overgrown path leading to the mansion's entrance. The air felt thick, as if the house itself was holding its breath. He reached the heavy wooden doors and turned the rusted brass handle. The door swung open effortlessly. Inside, the mansion was eerily silent, save for the distant sound of a grandfather clock ticking. Tick-tock, tick-tock, Daniel frowned. The house had no power. How was the clock working? He moved through the entryway, his footsteps echoing. The walls were lined with faded portraits, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow him. Dust covered everything, yet the floor had fresh footprints leading further inside. His radio crackled. Static. Daniel, leave, now. He froze. The words had been barely audible, buried beneath layers of static. Tom? That you? He asked, pressing the button. His partner had promised to check in every 15 minutes. Silence. Then, in the distance, something scratched against wood. A slow, deliberate sound. Scourge. Scourge. Daniel's pulse quickened. He followed the sound down a long corridor, his flashlight flickering. At the end of the hallway stood a single door, slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Inside was a small, dimly lit room with only a single chair facing the wall. The walls were covered in deep claw marks. In the chair sat a woman with her back to him, her long black hair hanging limply over her shoulders. Ma'am, Daniel asked hesitantly. The woman didn't move. A whisper rose from the corners of the room, soft at first, then growing louder. Leave before he wakes up. Daniel stepped back. Then the woman's head twisted completely around without her body moving. Her eyes were hollow. Her mouth was stretched wide in a silent scream. Daniel bolted. The house came alive behind him. The walls groaned, doors slammed shut, and a shadow darted past at the end of the hall. The whispering grew into a chorus of voices, some crying, some laughing, some begging him to stay. He reached the front door and yanked it open, only to find himself back in the small room. The woman was still in the chair. Only now, she was standing. You shouldn't have come. The last thing Daniel saw was the room fading to black and a pair of hands closing around his throat. 1 week later, the real estate agency sent Tom to check on Daniel, who had never reported back. When Tom entered the mansion, he found everything silent. No signs of struggle, no footprints but his own. He searched the house for hours. Then, finally, he found a small, dimly lit room. Inside, a man sat in a chair, facing the wall. Tom gasped. It was Daniel. Only Daniel's face was hollow, his mouth stretched wide. And when Tom turned to run, the door slammed shut. The door slammed shut behind Tom with a force that rattled the walls. His breath hitched. The dim light flickered, casting long, unnatural shadows across the room. Daniel sat in the chair, completely still. Tom's instincts screamed at him to run, but something held him in place, a presence in the room. He could feel it, like cold fingers pressing into his skin. "Daniel," Tom whispered. His voice felt too loud in the oppressive silence. Daniel didn't move. Tom took a hesitant step forward. The moment his foot touched the floor, Daniel's head snapped to the side, unnaturally fast. His mouth stretched wider, too wide. His eyes were black voids, empty of humanity. Then Daniel's voice came, distorted and wrong. "You shouldn't be here." Tom stumbled backward. His flashlight flickered, and for a brief second, he saw something else in the room. A dark figure, just behind Daniel's chair. Too tall, too thin, its limbs jagged like broken bones. It wasn't Daniel speaking. Tom bolted for the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The wood pulsed under his hands like something was breathing on the other side. He turned back. The chair was empty. Daniel was gone. Then, whispering. Not one voice, dozens. They swirled around him, growing louder until they were screaming in his ears. "Get out! Stay with us! He's awake!" A hand, ice cold, bony and clawed, wrapped around his wrist. Tom screamed, wrenching free, just as the door behind him flew open on its own. He stumbled into the hallway and ran, his heartbeat pounding like thunder. He didn't look back. He didn't want to. By the time he reached his car, the mansion was completely dark again, as if nothing had happened. But as he fumbled with his keys, he caught one last glimpse of the upstairs window. Daniel was there, standing in the window, smiling, but it wasn't Daniel anymore. 1 year later, the house on Hollow Creek Road went back on the market. A new buyer, another real estate agent. The cycle continued. And inside the silent room, the chair remained, waiting for its next guest. The door never stayed closed for long. The house never stayed empty for long. Despite its history, despite the disappearances, the mansion always found new guests. It had been a year since Tom fled, yet the silent room remained unchanged. The chair still faced the wall. The whispers never truly stopped. Then came Eleanor Reeves. She wasn't a real estate agent. She wasn't a buyer. She was a paranormal investigator drawn to the mansion by its reputation. Unlike the others, she knew what she was walking into. Armed with cameras, digital recorders, and a worn leather journal full of notes on Hollow Creek's dark past, Eleanor entered the house. And the house welcomed her. The moment she crossed the threshold, the door clicked shut behind her. She smirked. "Not my first time, you know." But the house didn't care. She pressed forward, ignoring the dust, the oppressive silence, the way the air felt too thick in her lungs. Her goal was the silent room. She followed the hallways, barely needing her map. The house had a way of leading people exactly where they needed to go. When she reached the door, she hesitated. It was already open. Inside, the chair sat in its usual place, the wall covered in deep claw marks. And standing next to the chair was Daniel, or at least something that looked like Daniel. His skin was pale and stretched too tightly over his bones. His eyes were black voids, empty and endless. And when he smiled, it was all wrong. Eleanor exhaled slowly. "You're not Daniel?" The thing in Daniel's skin tilted its head. Then in a voice that wasn't his, it whispered, "Neither are you." The door slammed shut. Her camera glitched, static swallowing the screen. Her radio hissed with garbled words she couldn't understand. Then the chair creaked. Something was sitting in it now. Something that had been waiting. The whispers rose again, But this time they were different. Not just voices. Laughter. Deep, guttural laughter. Eleanor gritted her teeth, clutching the talisman around her neck. "I don't scare easy." The laughter stopped. A breath of cold air slid past her ear, and then a voice whispered the truth. "You should..." Outside the mansion. A young couple drove past Hollow Creek Road that night. The mansion stood completely dark, as it always did. But as they passed by, the woman in the passenger seat frowned. "I thought you said no one lived there." Her boyfriend glanced over. "Yeah, no one has for years. Why?" She shivered, rubbing her arms. "Because I swear I just saw someone standing in the upstairs window, watching us." Her boyfriend laughed it off. "Probably just your imagination." But as they drove away, the mansion's front door creaked open. And from the second-floor window, Eleanor watched them leave, smiling. But Eleanor never left, and the silent room still waits for the next visitor. 1 month later, Eleanor's car was still parked outside the mansion. The doors locked, the keys still in the ignition. But she was nowhere to be found. Local authorities investigated. They found her camera smashed into pieces in the entryway. Her journal was open on the floor, the last few pages covered in frantic scrawls. "It's not a spirit. It's something older. It doesn't haunt. It feeds. The chair is the key. Do not sit in the chair." The last line had been written over and over, gouged into the paper, but no trace of Eleanor. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just emptiness. And yet, in the silent room, the chair was no longer empty. It had a new occupant, someone who looked like Eleanor. But when the police checked the house's security footage, they saw something impossible. The timestamp showed the exact moment Eleanor disappeared. She had been standing in the room, facing the chair. Then, in a split second, she was gone, replaced by a figure already sitting in the chair. Her, but not her. It never showed how she sat down. She was just there, motionless, face blank, staring at the wall. And then, at the end of the footage, she turned her head toward the camera and smiled. 1 year later, Hollow Creek Mansion had been condemned. No buyers, no visitors, no explanations. Yet, the silent room never stayed empty. A group of teenagers daring each other on a cold October night decided to break in. They laughed as they stepped inside, their flashlights flickering. They made jokes about ghosts, about Daniel, about Eleanor. Then one of them stopped in the hallway. "Guys, the room's already open." The others turned their beams toward the far end of the corridor. The door to the silent room was ajar, waiting, and inside someone was already sitting in the chair, long hair covering their face, completely motionless. "Eleanor," one of the boys whispered. A moment of silence. Then, ever so slowly, the figure's head turned toward them. Black, empty eyes, and a smile too wide, too sharp. The door slammed shut, and the mansion swallowed them whole. Outside, the wind howled. The house would wait again, because the silent room was never truly empty, only waiting. The mansion's grip only tightened as the years went on. Eleanor Reeves, once a fearless investigator, became another whisper in the walls of Hollow Creek. Her name faded into nothingness. Her disappearance no longer a mystery, but an inevitable fate. The house did not care for the passage of time. It simply fed on the lost, the the curious, the desperate souls who wandered too close. Years passed, and new owners arrived, each one with their own plans, each one vanishing into the house's insatiable hunger. But it wasn't just the house that had changed. The mansion had evolved, adapting to its own twisted nature. The walls stretched, the rooms expanded and contracted, reshaping the interior with each passing day. Sometimes there were new doors where there had been none before. Sometimes the layout of the hallways was different, disorienting the guests, making them feel trapped in a living maze. And now, there was a new arrival. Zara Daniels. Zara had heard the stories. She had heard of the disappearances, the strange happenings, the cursed nature of the house on Hollow Creek Road. But Zara was different. She was no ordinary visitor. Zara had a deep fascination with the paranormal, but not in the usual sense. She wasn't a curious thrill seeker like Eleanor. Zara had lived her entire FC life surrounded by the supernatural. Her grandmother had been a witch, one of the last in her line, and Zara had inherited the gift. She wasn't afraid of the mansion. She knew how to confront evil. What Zara didn't know was that the house was waiting for her. She parked her car in front of the mansion as the wind howled through the trees. The mansion towered over her, its dark silhouette looming against the moonlit sky. Zara had no intention of leaving. She had come here for a reason. She'd tracked the energy, the dark force emanating from this place, and now she was going to face it. She had no idea what she was walking into. The door creaked open as if inviting her inside. The silent room, the final confrontation. Zara entered the house, the air growing thicker with each step. The mansion seemed to sigh, the walls creaking in welcome. She could feel the presence of something ancient, something evil, lurking in the shadows. Her senses were on high alert, but she was undeterred. "I've faced worse," she muttered to herself. She moved down the hallway, eyes scanning every corner. The floorboards groaned under her weight, and somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of footsteps echoed, just out of reach. Her heart pounded. The silent room. She knew it was coming. She could feel it. The pull, the way the room called to her. The whispers began softly at first, then louder and more insistent. Zara. Zara. They had no voice, no mouths, only thoughts, ripples in the air. She ignored them, pushing forward until she reached the door. The door that had always been open. Inside, the chair was waiting. And beside it, standing as though it had always been there, was a figure. It was Eleanor. Zara stared at her, her pulse quickening. The woman before her looked like Eleanor, but she wasn't. Eleanor's eyes were hollow, her skin stretched thin over her skull. She smiled, but it wasn't a smile. It was the expression of something far older. Zara clenched her fists. "I know what you are." The thing in Eleanor's skin chuckled, its voice hollow. "You think you know? You think you can control me?" The walls seemed to lean in, suffocating her with a crushing presence. The air felt alive, as if the house itself was breathing, hungry for something. Zara reached into her bag and pulled out a talisman, her grandmother's amulet. It hummed with power, a bright golden light emitting from its center. "I can stop you." Eleanor's smile stretched further. "No one can stop me. No one ever has." The room seemed to pulse with darkness, and for a moment, Zara thought she would suffocate. But then, with a deep breath, She slammed the talisman into the floor. The light exploded outward. For a moment, silence. And then, the world around her seemed to shatter. The aftermath. Zara awoke in a room unfamiliar to her, her body aching, her mind clouded. The mansion was gone. The silent room was gone. She was alone, lying on the cold floor of an empty house. The air was no longer thick. The whispers were silent. But something felt wrong. The talisman was gone, and in its place, on the walls, were new claw marks. Deep, fresh, as if the house was still alive, still hungry. And in the distance, Zara heard something else. A voice. "We'll be waiting." Zara sat up, her breathing ragged. The mansion was gone, but the marks on the walls told a different story. She wasn't free. Not yet. She reached into her jacket for her grandmother's talisman. But it was gone, replaced by something else. A small wooden figurine carved in the shape of a chair. Her stomach twisted. The silent room had left its mark on her. The whispers had faded, but the air around her still carried a faint pressure, like a presence unseen, watching, waiting. She forced herself to her feet. The house around her was empty, stripped bare. No furniture, no doors leading to other rooms, just an open void of wooden floors and crumbling walls. The place was completely abandoned. And yet, she felt it. The weight of something lingering. Zara stared at the small wooden figurine in her hand, her fingers trembling. The fire had consumed everything. The house, the thing inside it, everything. So how was this here? She turned it over. The wood was smooth, polished, untouched by the flames. As she studied it, something shifted. The air around her grew heavy again, the sky darkening too quickly for sunset. Then, a whisper brushed against her ear. "You think it's over?" Zara's breath caught. Her pulse pounded as she turned sharply, scanning the empty lot. Nothing but ash and debris. But something was wrong. The world felt different. The wind had stopped. The trees surrounding the mansion ruins were frozen, as if caught in a moment outside of time. The silence wasn't natural. It was the same silence she had felt inside the house. She dropped the wooden chair and stepped back. It didn't hit the ground. It floated, spinning, twisting, morphing. Before her eyes, the figurine began to change, the wood cracking, reshaping itself. The legs of the chair stretched into limbs. The back of the chair split into a head, a mouth, jagged teeth. Zara stumbled back. It was growing, becoming something else, something alive. Then, in the space where the house had once stood, a new door appeared. Roads standing alone. An impossible, freestanding door leading into nothing. Zara's breath came in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't over. She had burned the house down. But the house wasn't just wood and walls. It was never just a place. It was an idea, a curse. And curses don't burn. The door creaked open, and from the darkness beyond, two white eyes blinked open. The thing in the void laughed. "We told you. We'll be back." Then, the world shifted, and before Zara could scream, the door swallowed her whole. Epilogue, 1 month later. The land where Hollow Creek Mansion once stood had been cleared. Nothing remained but dirt and weeds. Most people had forgotten about it. All except for one person. A man in a suit walked along the empty lot, speaking into his phone. Yes, it's a prime location. The old house is gone and we're ready to build. He paused, smiling. Luxury apartments, actually. Hollow Creek residences. Should be done in a year. As he turned to leave, he didn't notice. Didn't see the way the ground behind him rippled as if something beneath the earth was shifting. Didn't hear the faint sound of a chair creaking. Didn't feel the cold breath of something watching, waiting. Because the house was never really gone. It was patient. And soon, it would open its doors again. 1 year later, Hollow Creek residences stood where the mansion once did. A luxury apartment complex, sleek and modern, built atop the ruins of what many had called a cursed place. No one spoke of the mansion anymore. No one mentioned the disappearances. No one remembered Zara Daniels, but the house remembered them. And it was waiting. Apartment 1408, the first tenant. Sam Rogers moved into Hollow Creek residences on a rainy October evening. His apartment, 1408, was on the top floor, overlooking the old Hollow Creek woods. The view was decent, the rent was high, but the weirdest thing was the silence. The building was brand new, yet there were no other tenants, at least none that he ever saw. The hallways were empty, the parking lot was never full, and despite the modern high-end security system, his door was always unlocked when he came home. He shrugged it off, probably maintenance. But that night, something changed. The whispering chair. It started with a sound. A slow, rhythmic creaking like wood shifting under weight. Sam sat up in bed. His apartment was still, bathed in dim streetlight glow. His phone read 3:33 a.m. The sound came again. Creak! Creak! He rubbed his eyes. Was someone in his apartment? He grabbed his phone, flicked on the flashlight, and swung his legs out of bed. The noise stopped. He held his breath, scanning the apartment. The kitchen was dark, the living room empty, the front door still locked. But then, he saw it. A chair. It was sitting in the middle of the living room. A small wooden chair. Sam's heart dropped. He didn't own a chair like that. He swallowed. His voice came out hoarse. Hello? No answer. The chair creaked again, then ever so slowly. It turned to face him. Sam bolted. He ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock, but the knob wouldn't turn. The wood beneath his feet felt soft, like he was standing on something alive. Then, behind him, a whisper. Welcome home. The lights cut out, and Sam screamed. Apartment 1408. For rent again. A week later, the building manager was showing apartment 1408 to a new potential tenant. The last guy just disappeared, the manager said with a shrug. But, don't worry about that. Happens more than you'd think. The young woman frowned. People just vanish? The manager smiled. The Hollow Creek residences. They have a way of keeping people. She shivered. Keeping people? The manager handed her the key. Welcome home. Behind them, in the dimly lit hallway, a door creaked open, and inside, a chair waited. Hollow Creek residences continued to attract new tenants, and just as quickly, they disappeared. Apartment 1408 was rented 5 times in the first year alone. None of its residents stayed longer than a month. Some left in the middle of the night, abandoning their furniture, their belongings, even their cars in the parking lot. Others were never heard from again. But the building owners didn't care. The rent checks always cleared. Ava Carter, the curious journalist. Ava Carter wasn't like the others. She wasn't moving into Hollow Creek residences because of its luxury status. She was there because of the disappearances. As an investigative journalist, Ava had spent years chasing urban legends, but this place was different. There was no ghost hunting hype online, no paranormal YouTubers sneaking in for clickbait videos, no police reports, despite the missing persons cases piling up. It was as if someone or something wanted this place kept quiet. That made it worth investigating. So Ava rented apartment 1408, and on her first night, the whispers began. The first night. Ava was ready. She had cameras set up, voice recorders running, and a notebook full of past tenants' names. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the first sound came, a slow, rhythmic creaking from the living room. Ava sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She reached for her phone, turned on the night vision camera, and stepped into the dark hallway. The air was wrong, too thick, too still, like she was walking into a vacuum of silence. Then she saw it, the chair. The same wooden chair described by past tenants, sitting dead center in the living room. It had not been there before. Ava's breath hitched. She raised her phone, recording. The screen glitched. The air grew colder, then ever so slowly. The chair turned to face her. The thing inside the chair. Ava didn't run. Instead, she spoke. "Who are you?" she asked, voice steady, camera recording. The whispers returned. "You shouldn't be here." Her phone vibrated violently, the screen warping, showing something else. Not the chair, not the apartment, but a room. The silent room. And inside it, a shadow sat in the chair. Its white eyes blinked. Then a voice, deeper, layered, ancient. "You're already mine." The chair lurched toward her. Ava screamed. The room collapsed into darkness. The missing tape. A week later, Hollow Creek Residences listed apartment 1408 for rent again. Ava Carter was never found, but a single recording remained in her apartment. A grainy, static-filled video from her phone. The final seconds showed a chair, sitting alone in a dark room. Then, the screen glitched, and in the last frame, a pair of white eyes opened, watching, waiting, and the whispers never stopped. Hollow Creek Residences. Grand opening sale. Luxury living in the heart of town. Move in today and experience elegance like never before. Special offer, 1 month free rent on apartment 1408. Come and see why so many choose to stay forever. Hollow Creek Residences thrived despite the whispers. New tenants came and new tenants vanished. The rent checks kept coming. The police never investigated, and the chair always waited. But something was changing. The house was growing stronger. The silent room was no longer just inside apartment 1408. It was spreading. Case number 27, Jake Holloway, the man who almost escaped. Jake Holloway was a skeptic, a contractor hired to expand Hollow Creek Residences. He didn't believe the stories. He had heard the rumors. Disappearing tenants, strange noises, the chair, but money talked, and his company was being paid well to add 20 new apartments to the building. So Jake ignored the feeling of being watched. He ignored the way his tools disappeared and reappeared in different places. He ignored the scratches on the walls, which looked too much like claw marks. Until one night, he couldn't ignore it anymore. What the night the chair moved. Jake had stayed late finishing a project on the 7th floor, a part of the building that shouldn't have existed. There were only 6 floors. Yet somehow he had been walking through a 7th for hours. And when he checked his watch, it was stuck at 3:33 a.m. Then he heard it. Creak, creak. He turned. A wooden chair sat at the end of the hall, waiting. His stomach dropped. Jake tried to move, but his feet wouldn't budge. The chair scraped forward on its own. Creak, creak. Then, from behind him, a whisper. Sit. Jake turned and saw them. The forgotten tenants. People who had vanished from Hollow Creek over the years. Their bodies were gone, but their shadows remained, standing, watching, waiting. And in the center of them all, the chair, empty, waiting for him. His vision blurred. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs. His body moved against his will. He was walking toward the chair. Number. No. But it was too late. He sat down. And then, the world went dark. 1 week later. Apartment 1408 is rented again. The construction project was canceled. Jake Holloway was never found. The blueprints for the 7th floor vanished. And yet, on some nights, the elevator stopped at floor 7, even though it shouldn't exist. And if anyone was foolish enough to step inside the hallway, they would find a chair waiting for them. And from the shadows, Jake Holloway watched, waiting for the next one to sit. Hollow Creek Residences, now leasing. Your perfect home awaits. Luxury living, brand new renovations, and modern elegance. Limited time offer. Move-in specials for apartment 1408. Don't miss your chance to be part of something special. Hollow Creek Residences continued to consume its tenants. But not everyone vanished without a trace. One person noticed. One person kept a record. His name was Declan Graves. A former FBI investigator now working as a private detective, Declan had spent years hunting that unexplainable. And Hollow Creek Residences? It was the black hole of missing persons cases. He had counted them. 37 people, all disappeared, all from this building. And no one was talking. No police reports, no news articles, no bodies, as if the building itself was erasing them. So Declan rented apartment 1408, and he planned to end this. First night, the invitation. Declan had done his research. He knew the patterns. The disappearances always happened within the first 2 weeks. The whispers always began at 3:33 a.m., and there was always a chair, waiting. So he was ready. He set up motion sensors, hidden cameras, and voice recorders. He carried a weapon, though he wasn't sure bullets would do much. And when the first sound came, he was already awake. Creak, creak, the sound of wood shifting. Declan sat up in bed, reaching for his phone. The camera feed from his living room glitched. Then, static. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped into the hallway. The room felt wrong. The air too dense, too thick. Then he saw it. The chair, sitting in the middle of the living room. And this time, someone was sitting in it. A woman. Her back was turned, long tangled hair, thin shoulders, but Declan recognized her instantly. Ava Carter, the journalist who had disappeared last year. His pulse pounded. Ava, the woman didn't move. Then she spoke. You shouldn't have come here. Declan's grip tightened on his flashlight. What happened to you? Ava tilted her head slightly, but still didn't face him. He's awake now. Declan's breath caught. Who? She whispered. The one in the chair. Then, the lights cut out, and from the darkness, a deeper voice spoke. You're already mine. The thing in the chair. Declan felt paralyzed. Something moved in the darkness. Something massive. Ava was gone. And the chair? It was empty. Waiting. Then, a presence loomed behind him. Cold breath against his neck. A whisper. Ancient and slow. Sit. Declan turned. A pair of white, lidless eyes blinked open in the shadows, and the darkness collapsed around him. The 7th floor. One last chance. Declan woke up somewhere else. Not his apartment, not Hollow Creek residences. A long, endless hallway. The walls rotted, the floors cracked, the air stale with something long dead. And at the very end, a single door. The sign above it read, Floor 7, the silent room. Declan knew what this meant. He had one chance. Find the room, find the chair, end this, or he would become just another whisper, another name on the missing persons list, another forgotten tenant. And the chair would wait for the next one. Hollow Creek Residences, now accepting tenants. Luxury apartments in a prime location, brand new amenities, beautiful views, and unbeatable pricing. Apartment 1408, 1 month free rent. Come stay and never leave. Declan stood in front of the door, the one labeled Floor 7, the silent room. His pulse pounded. He wasn't supposed to be here. The 7th floor didn't exist, but here he was, and something was waiting for him. The door opens. Declan reached for the rusted brass handle. The wood was warm, breathing. A whisper slithered through the air. You came to end this? Declan clenched his jaw. Yeah. You can't. The door swung open on its own. Inside Dash, a room with no windows, no exits, and in the center, as always, a chair, waiting, only this time, it wasn't empty. The thing in the chair. Something sat in it. Something ancient, something wrong. Its skin was stretched too tightly over its bones. Its fingers were too long, curling like talons. And its eyes, lidless, glowing white, staring directly at him. It grinned. You're the first one to make it this far. Declan's breath hitched. Who are you? It tilted its head, cracking like breaking wood. The first, the last, the house, the chair. I am all of it. Declan's fingers tightened around the binding charm in his pocket. Then I guess I just need to get rid of you. The thing laughed. The entire room shuddered. The walls rippled like liquid, and then the chair lunged toward him. The final stand! Declan dodged just in time. The chair slammed against the wall, sending a shockwave through the room. But the thing in the chair, it wasn't bound to it anymore. It moved. It stood, towering over him, its limbs elongating, its fingers clawing at the air. The whispers grew louder. Declan felt them inside his skull, scratching at his mind. The voices of everyone who had ever sat in the chair. We are still here. You cannot stop it. Sit, S-I-T. Declan fought against the nausea, the dizziness, the feeling of his body being pulled toward the chair. His grandmother had taught him one thing about curses. They have to be accepted. He wasn't going to. He yanked the charm from his pocket, a small silver coin etched with ancient runes. He slammed it into the floor, and the room exploded. The collapse of Hollow Creek residences. The building shook violently. Outside, tenants awoke to the sound of ripping wood, shattering glass, screams from nowhere. The walls twisted, rooms stretched into endless voids, the hallways collapsed in on themselves. And in apartment 1408, the chair crumbled into ash, and the thing in the chair, it screamed. It reached for Declan, its white eyes burning as it tried to pull him into the void. But it was too late. The silent room was breaking. The curse was unraveling. And for the first time in a century, the house was dying. The aftermath. Declan woke up outside, the Hollow Creek residences, gone. Nothing but rubble and dust. The news reports called it a gas explosion. But Declan knew better. He stared at the ruins, knowing that something had changed. The whispers were gone. The chair was gone. And yet, in his pocket, where his binding charm had been, there was something new. A small wooden figurine, a chair, and as he turned it over in his fingers, a whisper brushed against his ear. We'll be back. Hollow Creek. Construction begins. A new future awaits at Hollow Creek. Developers announce plans for a brand new residential complex on the site of the former Hollow Creek residences. Pre-sales open soon. Come be the first to move in and claim your seat. Hollow Creek residences had fallen, but the curse was not destroyed. It had merely moved. And to understand what came next, we must go back, way back, to where it all began. To the first chair, to the first victim, to the man who built the house before it was cursed. To Jonas Hollow. Year, 1892. The birth of the Silent Room. Jonas Hollow was a wealthy landowner and an obsessive man. He built Hollow Manor with a single vision in mind, to create a house that no one could ever leave. Why? Because Jonas hated endings. He hated people coming and going, disappearing from his life. His wife had left him. His children had abandoned him. And so, in his rage and grief, he sought to build a place that would never let anyone leave him again. A house that would hold on to its residents forever. But houses are just wood and stone. And so Jonas turned to something darker, something alive. The ritual. Deep in the foundation of the house, Jonas created a secret room. A room with no doors, no windows. A room that would be the heart of the house. The silent room. And in the center of that room, he placed a chair. A chair made from wood taken from the hanging tree, where criminals had been executed. A chair soaked in the blood of the condemned. And Jonas did something unforgivable. He trapped a soul inside it. The soul of a man who had been wrongfully executed. A man who had died screaming for justice. A man whose rage and suffering fused with the house itself. And when the ritual was done, the house changed. It awoke, it watched, and it began to consume. Anyone who sat in the chair became part of the house. Their voices became whispers. Their souls became walls. And Jonas? He vanished. No one knows what happened to him. Some say he sat in the chair himself. Some say he still walks the halls as a shadow, but the house remained. and it was hungry. Year 1912. The house claims its first family. When the Hollow family moved in, they lasted 1 month. The servants were the first to go. They disappeared one by one, their rooms found empty, untouched. The children spoke of whispers in the night. And the wife, Margaret Hollow, became obsessed with the chair. She would sit in it for hours, unmoving. And then one day, she never got up. Her husband tried to wake her, but she was already gone. Her eyes were open, her mouth stretched in a silent scream. She had become the first tenant of the silent room, the first of many. Year 1927. The house is abandoned, but never empty. After years of strange disappearances, Hollow Manor was sealed. No one wanted to live there, but the house waited. It called to people, those who were lost, those who had nowhere else to go. And when they entered, they never left. The silent room grew stronger. The chair grew hungrier. The whispers grew louder. And by the time developers tore down the manor in 1998, the curse didn't die. It simply moved into the foundation of Hollow Creek residences, waiting for more tenants, for more souls to claim, for the next person to sit in the chair. Present day, the curse spreads. Hollow Creek residences may be gone, but the curse is still alive. Because somewhere, in some new building, in some forgotten room, there is a chair, and if you see it, don't sit. Because once you do, you belong to the house, and the house never lets go. Coming soon, the next chapter. A brand new luxury hotel is opening soon. Grand Hollow Hotel, built for comfort, designed for eternity. Come stay the night and see why so many guests never check out. Because the silent room is still waiting, and the chair is never empty for long.